Admiral Threx stood in the grand chamber of the Galactic Summit, his alien form towering among a sea of delegates from dozens of species, each with their own agenda, their own concerns. The room was a cacophony of voices, and the hum of machinery translating every language known across the galaxy. Threx had been to countless summits over his centuries of service, but this one felt different. There was something undeniably curious about the humans. Their species had appeared on the galactic scene only a few years ago, but their potential remained an enigma to him. Threx had heard the reports, seen their rapid technological advancements, and witnessed their unusual tactics on the battlefield, but he was skeptical. How could such a small, fragile species possibly hold any real significance when compared to the might of his own people or the sheer intellect of the Elverians? As the summit rumbled on, the Admiral found his mind wandering away from the debates. His gaze flickered to a screen on the far side of the room, where a human child stood before a curious device. Threx tilted his head, his interest piqued not by the child, but by the odd machine they were playing with. It was simple by any standard, not a weapon, not a tool of diplomacy, but a childish contraption filled with lights and sounds. A game, he thought. What could this insignificant object possibly show him about the humans? Threx had seen species far more advanced in technology than the humans, and he had seen creatures far stronger. But what use could a game be in understanding the mind of a species who might one day join the ranks of the Galactic Council? He didn't even know why he had agreed to watch the demonstration in the first place. Curiosity had gotten the best of him, but it wasn't a curiosity based on genuine interest, more on a desire to confirm his suspicions that the humans were unworthy of the attention they had received from the Council. The human child, who appeared to be no older than 8, stood before the screen holding a small controller, their fingers moving quickly in an almost practiced manner. Threx couldn't help but notice the intensity in the child's eyes, the focused determination that most adults would fail to replicate when facing such a trivial task. The child's face lit up with joy as the machine responded to their movements. But what caught Threx off guard was the sudden change in the child's demeanor. When the game shifted into a new mode, the lights became more intense, the music more urgent, and the child's hands moved faster, more decisively. Threx leaned forward slightly, his interest now fully engaged as the child navigated the challenges presented by the game. Threx initially dismissed the activity as childish foolishness, but now he was forced to reconsider. Perhaps there was something more to this game than it appeared. The child was not just playing, they were solving puzzles, making decisions, adjusting their strategy. With every new development, the Admiral's mind began to race as he considered the implications of what he was seeing here. This was no simple game. This was a challenge designed to test the mind, to push its limits, and force the player to adapt in ways that Threx had not anticipated. He could see it in the child's movements, in the way they responded to each new situation. Threx felt a stirring of unease as he realized that perhaps he had underestimated humanity's potential. This game was not just for fun, it was a tool, a way to train their minds to think and adapt quickly, something far beyond the scope of what he had imagined for a species so young. The child's hands flew across the controller with a speed and precision that caught Admiral Threx off guard. The simulator, initially appearing as nothing more than a simple diversion, began to evolve before his eyes. The flashing lights and melodic sounds of the machine turned into something far more complex. It was as if the game had sensed the child's increasing skill and adapted accordingly, raising the stakes with every move. What was once a harmless amusement quickly morphed into a series of rapid decisions, each one carrying consequences. Threx's eyes narrowed as the child's focus sharpened. At first, he had thought that the child was merely pressing buttons in a carefree manner, enjoying the show of colors and flashing lights. But now he saw something different. There was intent behind each movement, an understanding of the deeper mechanics at play. The child had been thrown into a simulated space battle, with fleets of ships and dangerous obstacles. For a moment, Threx thought the child might falter. How could someone so young possibly grasp the intricacies of strategy and warfare? To his surprise, the child didn't hesitate. The small hands gripped the controller with a sense of purpose, adjusting the ship's formations, issuing commands, and scanning the virtual battlefield. Threx watched in growing fascination as the child managed their resources, fuel, ammunition, and shields, each decision made in a matter of seconds. The child was playing with a kind of instinctual understanding, as if they had trained for years to manage such a complex scenario. The Admiral found himself unable to look away, unable to ignore the sharpness in the child's movements. What he had once dismissed as a trivial game now appeared as a test of intelligence and quick thinking. The child's fleet was under attack. Enemy ships appeared from every direction, and the situation quickly became dire. Yet, instead of panicking, the child analyzed the situation with startling clarity. She ordered a retreat to a nearby asteroid field, where her fleet could hide and regroup. The decision was quick, bold, and efficient, and it worked. The enemy fleet followed, but the child had already set up a trap, using the asteroid field to ambush the enemy from all sides. Threx felt a strange thrill watching the maneuver unfold. He was witnessing something remarkable, something he hadn't expected from a species that, in his mind, was still in the early stages of development. As the simulation progressed, the child's decisions grew even more daring. With each level, the stakes increased. The child was no longer just managing a battle. She was negotiating peace treaties, solving resource crises, and preventing disasters. The game's scenarios were designed to test a player's ability to adapt to increasingly complex situations, and the child seemed to take them all in stride. At one point, the simulation presented the child with a moral dilemma. A faction of simulated beings had been forced into slavery by a rival group, and the child had to decide whether to send a rescue mission or negotiate a peaceful surrender. Threx observed as the child paused, her fingers hovering over the controller. The brief hesitation was not a sign of indecision, but of deep contemplation. The Admiral could see the wheels turning in the child's mind as she weighed the consequences of her actions. Finally, the child made her choice, opting to negotiate rather than force an immediate confrontation. The peace process was delicate, the simulated beings wary of betrayal, but the child's approach was thoughtful and patient. She presented a path for both sides to find common ground, and though the situation was fraught with danger, the outcome was a tentative peace. Threx's mind raced. This was not just a game. This was a training ground for human intellect, a space where the mind could stretch, adapt, and grow. What had seemed like childish entertainment had transformed into a series of lessons in strategy, diplomacy, and leadership. The Admiral felt a growing sense of unease. Was this something unique to this child, or was this the potential of humanity as a whole? Could the entire species, with their adaptability and creativity, pose a challenge to the galaxy in ways Threx had not even begun to consider? As the child navigated the increasingly complex levels of the simulation, Admiral Threx leaned forward, his earlier skepticism replaced by a burgeoning sense of fascination. What had initially seemed like a mindless activity now revealed itself as something far more intricate. The child was not simply playing a game. She was solving problems, analyzing risks, and executing strategies with a level of sophistication that was far beyond what he had anticipated. Each new scenario in the game forced her to think on her feet, to adjust her approach to shifting dynamics with remarkable fluidity. Threx could sense the underlying complexity of the simulation as it continued to escalate. At first, the game had seemed a straightforward affair. Fleets clashing in space, resources to be managed, enemies to be defeated. But now, the child faced more subtle challenges. She was tasked with saving an entire planet from ecological collapse, working with a simulated environment to balance resources, environmental health, and the needs of the population. The stakes were high, and yet the child seemed completely unfazed. As the planet's resources dwindled, the child quickly ordered a series of actions: mining new materials, altering agricultural methods, and organizing the population to reduce consumption. She didn't just make choices based on immediate gain, but considered long-term consequences, whether those consequences would alienate certain factions or disrupt fragile alliances. Frex had witnessed countless species in conflict, and yet he was struck by the child's ability to see beyond the immediate problem, to think of future repercussions. The simulation presented an unexpected challenge. A neighboring species sought to exploit the planet's dwindling resources for their own gain. The child was given the choice to either negotiate for peaceful trade or prepare for military confrontation. For a brief moment, the child hesitated, her fingers hovering above the controls. Frex watched closely, intrigued by the weight of the decision. It was clear that the child wasn't just choosing based on convenience. She was considering the morality of the situation. After a few moments, she chose diplomacy, proposing an agreement that would allow both civilizations to share the resources equitably, with safeguards to prevent exploitation. It was a move that balanced the needs of both sides, minimizing risk and conflict. The Admiral felt his respect for the child growing. What struck Frex most, however, was the child's ability to balance tactical ingenuity with empathy. He had spent his life observing strategies that relied on overwhelming strength or cold calculation, yet the child's choices reflected a deeper understanding, a nuanced sense of fairness, responsibility, and cooperation. He had never seen anything quite like it before. It was not that the child lacked the ability to make difficult decisions. On the contrary, she was decisive and bold when needed. It was simply that her decision-making process took into account the broader picture, something that could not be measured by the strict metrics of power or efficiency alone. As the game reached its next level, the child was thrown into a new scenario, one that mirrored the complexities of real-world diplomacy. A planet on the brink of war, its factions divided by ideological differences, faced the imminent collapse of society unless a resolution could be reached. The child, now fully immersed in the game, had to play the role of a mediator, navigating through complex negotiations between factions that each had their own agendas and grievances. Frex observed as the child listened carefully, adjusting her approach based on each faction's unique needs and fears. She didn't try to force a solution on them. Instead, she built trust, offering compromises where possible, and creating an environment where dialogue could flourish. The Admiral realized that the child wasn't just manipulating the game's mechanics. She was engaging in a practice that could have real-world applications. Frex's mind was racing. He had been watching this human child for only a short time, yet in those moments, he had seen more than he had ever expected. What he had assumed was a trivial demonstration had revealed the essence of human potential, an ability to think, adapt, and find solutions even in the most complex and chaotic of situations. The child had shown him something that he could never have predicted, that humans were not just capable of surviving in the galaxy, they were capable of reshaping it. And as he continued to watch, he realized that humanity's true power lay not in their weapons or their strength, but in their capacity for creative problem-solving and diplomacy. As the child navigated the increasingly complex levels of the simulation, Admiral Frex leaned forward, his earlier skepticism replaced by a burgeoning sense of fascination. What had initially seemed like a mindless activity now revealed itself as something far more intricate. The child was not simply playing a game. She was solving problems, analyzing risks, and executing strategies with a level of sophistication that was far beyond what he had anticipated. Each new scenario in the game forced her to think on her feet, to adjust her approach to shifting dynamics with remarkable fluidity. Frex could sense the underlying complexity of the simulation as it continued to escalate. At first, the game had seemed a straightforward affair. Fleets clashing in space, resources to be managed, enemies to be defeated. But now, the child faced more subtle challenges. She was tasked with saving an entire planet from ecological collapse, working with a simulated environment to balance resources, environmental health, and the needs of the population. The stakes were high, and yet the child seemed completely unfazed. As the planet's resources dwindled, the child quickly ordered a series of actions: mining new materials, altering agricultural methods, and organizing the population to reduce consumption. She didn't just make choices based on immediate gain, but considered long-term consequences, whether those consequences would alienate certain factions or disrupt fragile alliances. Threx had witnessed countless species in conflict, and yet he was struck by the child's ability to see beyond the immediate problem, to think of future repercussions. The simulation presented an unexpected challenge. A neighboring species sought to exploit the planet's dwindling resources for their own gain. The child was given the choice to either negotiate for peaceful trade or prepare for military confrontation. For a brief moment, the child hesitated, her fingers hovering above the controls. Threx watched closely, intrigued by the weight of the decision. It was clear that the child wasn't just choosing based on convenience. She was considering the morality of the situation. After a few moments, she chose diplomacy, proposing an agreement that would allow both civilizations to share the resources equitably, with safeguards to prevent exploitation. It was a move that balanced the needs of both sides, minimizing risk and conflict. The Admiral felt his respect for the child growing. What struck Threx most, however, was the child's ability to balance tactical ingenuity with empathy. He had spent his life observing strategies that relied on overwhelming strength or cold calculation, yet the child's choices reflected a deeper understanding, a nuanced sense of fairness, responsibility, and cooperation. He had never seen anything quite like it before. It was not that the child lacked the ability to make difficult decisions. On the contrary, she was decisive and bold when needed. It was simply that her decision-making process took into account the broader picture, something that could not be measured by the strict metrics of power or efficiency alone. As the game reached its next level, the child was thrown into a new scenario, one that mirrored the complexities of real-world diplomacy. A planet on the brink of war, its factions divided by ideological differences, faced the imminent collapse of society unless a resolution could be reached. The child, now fully immersed in the game, had to play the role of a mediator, navigating through complex negotiations between factions that each had their own agendas and grievances. Threx observed as the child listened carefully, adjusting her approach based on each faction's unique needs and fears. She didn't try to force a solution on them. Instead, she built trust, offering compromises where possible, and creating an environment where dialogue could flourish. The Admiral realized that the child wasn't just manipulating the game's mechanics. She was engaging in a practice that could have real-world applications. Threx's mind was racing. He had been watching this human child for only a short time, yet in those moments, he had seen more than he had ever expected. What he had assumed was a trivial demonstration had revealed the essence of human potential, an ability to think, adapt, and find solutions even in the most complex and chaotic of situations. The child had shown him something that he could never have predicted, that humans were not just capable of surviving in the galaxy, they were capable of reshaping it. And as he continued to watch, he realized that humanity's true power lay not in their weapons or their strength, but in their capacity for creative problem-solving and diplomacy. The longer Admiral Threx watched the child's interaction with the simulation, the more he was forced to confront the growing realization that humanity was far more dangerous than he had originally believed. Each level presented new and unexpected challenges that forced the child to think on her feet, adapt, and evolve her strategy. What had initially seemed like a simple game had transformed into an arena where every decision carried weight, where each choice could lead to success or failure. Yet the child, with her wide-eyed enthusiasm, handled it all with a grace and intelligence that spoke volumes about her species. The simulation now placed the child in a new scenario, one that made Threx pause. It was no longer just a battle or a race to gather resources. This was a moral dilemma, one that required more than just strategic thinking. It tested the child's sense of ethics, her ability to navigate the delicate balance between survival and compassion. The simulation introduced a civilization on the brink of collapse, their resources running dry and their society in chaos. The child had to decide whether to offer limited aid and resources to the struggling planet or withhold help in favor of her own people. The choice was stark. Would the child choose the path of self-preservation, Or would she risk her own people's well-being to aid those in need? Threx was curious. How would the child approach this decision? He knew that many species in the galaxy would have acted without hesitation, choosing their own survival above all else. It was a natural instinct, one that his own people had long relied upon. But the child hesitated. Her fingers hovered over the controls, and for a brief moment, Threx thought she might not be able to make a decision at all. Then, slowly, deliberately, the child made her choice. She chose to share the resources. It wasn't a rash decision made out of naivety, but one that seemed calculated, thoughtful. The child didn't simply offer resources to the struggling civilization. She crafted a plan that ensured both her people and the struggling planet could survive together. She forged an agreement between the two sides, establishing a mutual exchange of technology and expertise, ensuring that both parties could thrive in the long term. It was a solution that required both ingenuity and empathy, a solution that balanced self-interest with a sense of moral responsibility. Threx was stunned. It was not a decision based on cold logic or sheer pragmatism, but one that demonstrated the depth of humanity's understanding of not just survival, but the value of cooperation and empathy. The Admiral had seen countless leaders make decisions based purely on strategic gain, but never had he seen one with such an intricate understanding of what it meant to coexist in a complex, interconnected universe. As the child continued to navigate through the game, Threx began to realize that humanity was not only capable of making difficult decisions, but also of choosing paths that others might view as weak or impractical. This child was not simply solving problems in the game. She was demonstrating the kind of leadership that transcended mere tactical thinking. She was showing him the power of compassion, of understanding, and the value of long-term solutions over short-term gains. It struck Threx then, with full force, that humanity was not just resilient or clever. They were capable of seeing the bigger picture. Where other species might have seen the choice as a simple matter of survival, the child understood that survival was not just about defeating an enemy or hoarding resources. It was about building relationships, forging alliances, and thinking beyond oneself. She understood that true strength lay not in overpowering others, but in lifting them up, in ensuring that everyone had the opportunity to thrive. Threx could hardly fathom the impact this approach could have on the galaxy as a whole. He found himself looking at humanity in a completely new light. They were not just survivors of a harsh world. They were architects of a new kind of power, a power born not of dominance or might, but of intelligence, empathy, and collaboration. And in this, humanity was unlike any species Threx had ever encountered. It was a realization that was both humbling and unsettling. Admiral Threx leaned back, the full weight of what he had just witnessed beginning to settle in. The child had made her decision, one that demonstrated not only her intelligence but her empathy, qualities that were too often undervalued in the galaxy's cutthroat environment. Threx found himself replaying the moment in his mind, the calmness with which the child had approached the moral dilemma, her ability to balance compassion with pragmatism. He had expected the child to choose the survival of her people at all costs. Instead, she had chosen cooperation, understanding that true survival in the vastness of space was not simply about defeating enemies, but about creating lasting bonds that could sustain civilizations. As the simulation advanced, the child faced another challenge, this time one that tested her ability to negotiate and lead under pressure. A neighboring species had accused her civilization of a transgression, an act of war that had never occurred. Tensions ran high, and war seemed imminent. The game presented the child with two clear options: to prepare for war or to attempt to peacefully resolve the issue through diplomacy. The child paused. Her fingers rested lightly on the controller, and for a moment, Threx could feel the heavy weight of the decision on her shoulders. This was it, Threx thought. This would be the ultimate test. The path of war might seem the more direct option. After all, it would be easy to escalate tensions and fight back. But the child, once again, demonstrated a maturity that was well beyond her years. She chose diplomacy. What followed was not a simple conversation, but a series of carefully crafted negotiations. The child presented evidence of the misunderstanding, offering compromise without losing the dignity of her people. It wasn't just about proving innocence. It was about finding a way for both sides to come together and resolve their differences. The simulated species was wary, distrustful, but the child used her words as a tool of peace, showing a remarkable ability to convey sincerity and integrity even in the face of adversity. Frex was astonished at the child's diplomacy. He had seen leaders from hundreds of species throughout his career, some of them far older and more experienced than this young human, and none of them had demonstrated such poise under pressure. Where others might have resorted to threats or force, the child had used dialogue and understanding to bridge the gap between two civilizations on the brink of war. In that moment, Frex realized something profound about humanity. Their power didn't lie solely in their ability to fight. It lay in their capacity to bring people together, to build consensus, to resolve conflict in a way that benefited everyone involved. He watched as the simulation played out, seeing the growing trust between the two sides, the formation of a tentative alliance. The child had done it. She had averted war without a single shot being fired, without shedding any blood. The simulated species, initially full of anger and suspicion, now looked to the child's civilization as a partner, recognizing their willingness to seek understanding rather than dominance. For the first time in years, Frex felt something he hadn't expected: respect. He had long thought that military power and technological superiority were the true measures of strength in the galaxy, but he now understood that true power came from a different source: humanity's ability to connect with others, to offer solutions where none seemed possible, to fight not with weapons, but with words and ideas. The Admiral couldn't shake the feeling that the galaxy was on the cusp of something unprecedented. If humanity's young minds were capable of this level of insight and wisdom, then what might the future hold when they grew older, when they matured into leaders, diplomats, and thinkers? What impact could they have on a galaxy that had been dominated by violence and competition for so long? Frex had seen the future of humanity. It was a future built not on the foundation of war, but on cooperation, diplomacy, and innovation. In that moment, he understood that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their strength or technology. It was their minds, their ability to empathize, to understand, to create solutions where others saw only problems. And with that, he realized that humanity's place in the galaxy was not just secured, it was essential. Admiral Frex could hardly contain his thoughts as he watched the child continue to navigate through the layers of the simulation. What had started as a simple exercise in observation had transformed into an internal reckoning. The decisions she made were not just clever, but profoundly wise. Her ability to resolve conflicts, her leadership in times of uncertainty, and her remarkable grasp of diplomacy were all indicators of a species that, despite its relatively young age in galactic terms, had the potential to reshape the future. Each decision seemed to resonate with a deeper understanding of balance. Balance between strength and compassion, between individual needs and the greater good. In the simulation, the child now faced a dire scenario. A planetary system was on the brink of collapse due to an escalating environmental crisis. Resources were dwindling, the atmosphere was deteriorating, and the indigenous species, facing extinction, were desperate. The child was forced to manage not just the human response, but the entire planetary ecosystem, balancing technological innovation with the preservation of the planet's fragile environment. This was no longer just a test of military or strategic ability. It was a test of the child's capacity to think as a guardian of both her people and the natural world around them. The simulation system had recognized her growing skill, adjusting the parameters of the crisis to test her in ways that were nearly impossible. The planet's survival was in the child's hands, and Frex observed with growing admiration as she didn't hesitate for a moment. With focused intent, she began issuing commands to deploy human technology, harnessing renewable energy sources and sustainable practices to stabilize the environment. Yet it wasn't just about technological intervention. She also sought the wisdom of the planet's indigenous species, asking for their expertise in sustainable living, their knowledge of the land that had been passed down for generations. Threx could feel his respect for the child growing deeper with each passing moment. In a galaxy where the norm was often to conquer or exploit, this child was demonstrating something utterly revolutionary. She was a steward of both progress and preservation, a leader who understood that the future of civilizations could not be built on the destruction of the environment that supported them. The child's approach to the crisis was not about saving the planet at any cost, nor was it about simply saving her people. It was about ensuring the survival of both in harmony, about weaving together the needs of humanity and the native species in a way that would allow both to thrive. As the simulation progressed, the child found a solution, one that involved cooperative technology sharing and eco-friendly advancements, all the while respecting the planet's delicate balance. She brokered peace between the indigenous species and the human colonists, finding a common ground where both could benefit. The delicate dance of technology and nature, of progress and preservation, was a masterclass in leadership, a leadership that had long been absent from many galactic leaders, who often viewed the environment as something to be conquered, not respected. Threx found himself lost in thought as the simulation came to a close, the planet now stabilized, and the indigenous species working alongside humanity for a future that respected both sides. It wasn't just the child's ability to solve problems that had impressed him. It was her understanding of how to solve them in a way that respected the very foundation of life itself. She hadn't just saved the planet. She had ensured that the survival of humanity and the indigenous species was sustainable, built on trust and cooperation rather than exploitation. As the simulation's final score flashed across the screen, Threx sat back in his chair, deep in contemplation. He had watched as a young human had not only mastered strategy and diplomacy, but had demonstrated a wisdom that even the oldest and most experienced leaders in the galaxy could learn from. The child had, in a sense, passed every test thrown at her, not by force or cunning, but through empathy, adaptability, and an inherent understanding of the interconnectedness of all things. Threx now understood something profoundly significant. Humanity was not a species to be underestimated. Their capacity for growth, their ability to think creatively and empathetically, would ensure that they had a vital role in the future of the galaxy. And as he sat there, reflecting on what he had seen, he realized that humanity wasn't just a potential threat. It was a potential partner, one that could help change the very nature of the galaxy's future for the better. Admiral Threx sat motionless in the dimly lit command center, his eyes fixed on the screen in front of him. The simulations had ended, but the hum of his thoughts refused to quiet. The child had exceeded every expectation, both his and the system's, and left him with a sense of awe that was, frankly, rare for someone of his experience. It was clear now. Humanity was more than just another species in the galactic fold. They were something different, something potentially transformative. Yet, as the last flickering of the simulation disappeared into the archives, Threx could not shake the gnawing feeling that there was more at play here than mere intellectual capacity. Something deeper, more elemental, was driving the child's every decision. It was as though the child understood, inherently, something that even the greatest minds in the galaxy had yet to grasp, that all life, regardless of its origin or form, was bound together in a web of shared responsibility. It was the kind of insight that transcended diplomacy and technology. It was a moral understanding, an understanding of the sanctity of life in all its forms, that seemed to guide humanity's path forward. Threx rose from his chair, pacing across the room, as if trying to outrun the storm of thoughts in his mind. The child had just brokered a peace that many would have thought impossible. She had not only saved a planet on the brink of ecological collapse, but had also united two species with seemingly incompatible needs and desires. Her actions had proven that humanity had not only the intellectual capacity for such feats, but the moral clarity to see them through. They understood what it meant to care, not just for their own but for others, even those who had once been their adversaries. A soft chime from his console interrupted his musings. He moved back to his seat, activating the communication system. The screen flickered to life, revealing the face of Commander Vrex, one of his closest advisors. "Admiral." Vrex's voice was cautious but respectful. "The Council is requesting your immediate input on the next course of action. The situation with the humans has escalated beyond expectations. They want to know where we stand." Vrex took a deep breath, glancing at the now-still simulation data on his screen. The Galactic Council had long been wary of humanity's potential. They had observed the rapid growth of the human race, their unparalleled adaptability, and their defiance against even the most insurmountable odds. There had been whispers in the corridors of power for years, whispers about humanity's potential to rise and reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. Now, after witnessing the child's actions firsthand, Vrex knew that these whispers would soon become a deafening roar. The humans were no longer just a force to be reckoned with. They were a force capable of bringing about the kind of change that would either elevate or dismantle the existing order of things. And that, in itself, was a power that could either heal or fracture the galaxy. "Tell the Council that I need time," Vrex said, his voice firm, but with an undercurrent of something else. Uncertainty, perhaps. "I will speak to them when I am ready." There was a brief pause before Vrex nodded. "Understood, Admiral. We await your decision." Vrex deactivated the communication link, his mind racing. He had seen the child's brilliance. He had felt the spark of something greater within her, something that wasn't just about saving one planet or one people. It was about redefining what it meant to live in this galaxy. Humanity had done what no one thought possible. And as much as the old powers of the galaxy might fear this, Vrex couldn't help but feel that perhaps it was exactly what the galaxy needed. He looked once more at the simulation's ending score. No, not just a score, but a testament to humanity's extraordinary potential. He had not expected such a result, nor had he thought it possible that a species so young could grasp concepts that even his people struggled to understand. But here, in the child's actions, was something even more profound: the dawning of a new era. Humanity had passed every test thrown at it, not through sheer force, but through empathy, adaptability, and wisdom. It was a species that would not just survive, it would thrive, and it would lead. The question now wasn't whether humanity had earned a place at the galactic table. The question was whether the galaxy itself was ready for what humanity would bring to it. With that, Admiral Vrex made his decision. It was time to approach the Council, not with the caution that had once defined his people's stance on humanity, but with something far more potent. He would call for a new alliance, a true partnership that would unite the old powers and the young, the experienced and the new. He activated a new communication channel. "Vrex, prepare a message for the Council. I am ready to speak." The time had come. The galaxy would have to change, and humanity would lead the way.